A lost boy with no past. A wounded dog with no name. When young Ben finds a mysterious golden retriever hiding behind a grocery store, neither could have guessed that their bond would uncover secrets buried deep beneath government silence. As their journey unravels memories, false identities, and hidden experiments, the boy rediscovers his true name Miles, and the heroic dog Bramble becomes the key to unlocking the truth. This is not just a story about rescue. It is about memory, identity, and the healing power of loyalty. Stay with us as we unfold a journey of courage and silent remembrance. Ben was not like the other kids in his neighborhood. He didn't run around at the playground or ride bikes with friends. He didn't go to birthday parties or talk much at school. At 11 years old, Ben lived in a world of quiet shadows where sounds felt distant and smiles were hard to hold on to. The only person he truly spoke with was his mother, a night shift nurse who was often already gone when Ben came home from school. One autumn afternoon, as the golden sunlight stretched low across the cracked pavement, Ben was walking home when he noticed something strange. At the corner where overgrown bushes and trash usually collected, something moved gently. A dog. Not a little one on a leash, but a big golden retriever curled up like it had been waiting there for hours. The dog looked worn, yet majestic in its own way, with fur that caught the light and eyes that seemed far older than it should have. Ben stopped walking. The dog lifted its head. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment, something passed between them. The dog didn't bark. It didn't flinch. It just looked at Ben the way no one else had in a very long time. Slowly, cautiously, Ben stepped forward. The dog didn't move away. Ben crouched down beside it and reached out a hand. His voice was quiet but steady. "Hi there. What's your name?" There was a collar around the dog's neck, worn and cracked with age. But the tag was missing. Only a faded line where metal had once hung remained. Ben gently petted the dog's back, and what surprised him most wasn't the warmth or softness, but the way the dog tilted its head as if it truly understood every word Ben had said. "No name, ha," Ben whispered. "Okay, how about Lucky?" The dog gave a soft chuff, almost like a nod. Ben smiled for the first time in weeks. He looked around. No one was watching. No one ever was. It was just him and this strange dog who had appeared like an answer to a question he didn't know he had asked. He stood up and whispered, "Come on," and Lucky followed. That night, Ben hid Lucky in the garage behind their small house. He sneaked out blankets, a bowl of water, and leftover food. His mother never noticed. Lucky slept curled in the shadows, and Ben, for the first time in months, went to bed feeling like something in his world had shifted. The next morning, Ben woke up early and ran to check on Lucky. The dog was still there. When Ben opened the door, Lucky stood, tail wagging softly, eyes glowing with quiet joy. It felt like the dog had been waiting just for him. From that moment on, Ben had a secret. A friend. A reason to wake up and come home with a smile. Their bond formed without words, through looks and shared silences. Something deep and real began to grow. But Lucky was not just a stray. There was something in his eyes, in the calm way he moved, in the way he always sat facing the door like a sentry on duty. Each time Ben touched the old collar, he felt a tug inside him, as if it were a thread leading somewhere hidden and important. And Ben had no idea that Lucky's arrival would change everything. That this quiet dog with no tag would pull him into a story far bigger than he could imagine. A story where courage would not come from shouting, but from listening to what no one else dared to hear. For the next several days, Lucky became the secret heartbeat of Ben's life. At school, he kept to himself as always, but now his drawings were filled with dogs and forests, tails in motion and golden fur leaping through clouds. At home, he pretended to do homework while sneaking glances toward the garage door, where Lucky waited quietly like a patient guardian. On the fourth morning, Ben noticed something odd. When he brought Lucky a piece of chicken from dinner, the dog didn't just wait politely, he sat straight, eyes on Ben's hand, and made a quick motion with his paw, a gesture so precise it looked like a signal. Then he sat perfectly still until Ben said go. That one word, go. As soon as it left his lips, Lucky ate, quickly but with control. Not like a stray scavenging, more like a soldier obeying command. Ben crouched beside him. "You're trained, aren't you?" Lucky looked at him and blinked slowly, as if confirming without needing a sound. That night, when his mom was asleep, Ben searched online. He typed in phrases like trained dog found without tag, golden retriever missing collar, military dog lost, page after page. He didn't find Lucky, but what he did find made his heart race. Articles about dogs used in rescue missions and police work in the army. Some were declared heroes. Others had vanished, discharged, forgotten. Was Lucky one of them? The next morning, Ben took a different route to school. There was a small veterinary clinic 2 blocks away. He had passed it hundreds of times, never thinking much about it. But now he stood outside, clutching Lucky's collar in his pocket. He waited until the sign flipped to open and then walked in, his voice barely more than a whisper. "My dog's neck has a scar. I think it used to have a tag. Can you look at it?" The receptionist smiled, a little surprised to see a boy come in alone. She motioned for him to wait, and within minutes, an older man in a white coat appeared, Dr. Mills, his eyes kind behind square glasses. "Where's your dog, son?" Ben hesitated, then motioned outside. Lucky was waiting under the shade of a tree, just as Ben had asked. They entered the exam room, and Lucky jumped onto the table with unexpected grace. Dr. Mills examined the collar area and ran his fingers gently along the scar. "This wasn't from a fight," the vet said quietly. "It's a clean cut, like someone removed the tag intentionally. You said he had no chip?" Ben nodded. "No chip, no name, just Lucky." The vet looked thoughtful. "That's strange. And this kind of muscle tone. He's been trained, all right. But not just by any owner. This is government-level conditioning. Service dog, maybe even tactical." Ben's heart skipped. But why would someone like that end up alone in my neighborhood? Dr. Mills didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a small device, passing it over Lucky's back once more, just to be sure. A faint beep. The vet blinked, then checked the screen. "Well, that's new. There's a chip, but it's encrypted, not civilian. Encrypted. Military grade, which means I can't read it." Ben stared at Lucky, whose calm eyes hadn't left him the whole time. Suddenly, the simple joy of having a dog transformed into something deeper, something that made his stomach twist. Lucky wasn't just his. He had belonged to someone important, and someone had tried to erase him. As they left the clinic, Lucky pressed close to Ben's side. The sun was high in the sky, and the sidewalks buzzed with the usual noise of life. But in Ben's chest was a storm of questions. He had found a dog. But maybe the dog had also found him. And maybe neither of them truly knew what they had just stepped into. That afternoon, Ben skipped the bus and walked home with Lucky trotting silently beside him. The weight of the veterinarian's words hung in his thoughts like thick fog. A government-trained dog with a removed ID tag and an encrypted chip who would try to erase a dog's identity? And why? As they passed the edge of the neighborhood, Lucky suddenly stopped. His ears perked, body tensing. Ben followed his gaze. Across the street, hidden behind tall wire fencing and an overgrown wall of pine trees, stood a faded sign, Wildlife Monitoring Compound. Authorized personnel only. Ben had passed this place before. It looked abandoned, like most kids' ghost stories. But now, in the bright afternoon sun, something felt off. A white SUV sat tucked behind the fence, spotless. The camera above the gate clicked and whirred as they approached. Lucky growled low, not aggressive but cautious. His tail went stiff. Ben froze. "Do you know this place?" Ben whispered, his fingers brushing the fur along Lucky's back. The dog's eyes were locked on the gate, unblinking. Suddenly, the gate opened with a buzz. A man stepped out tall, wearing a uniform that wasn't quite police, not quite military. Mirrored sunglasses. No name tag. He looked straight at Ben. "Can I help you, son?" Ben stammered. I was just walking. I live down the street." The man's voice was flat. "This is restricted property. You need to keep moving." Lucky barked once. A sharp, piercing sound that startled even Ben. The man's hand twitched near his belt. Not a gun, but something clipped underneath his jacket. Ben pulled Lucky gently back. "Sorry, sir, we're leaving." The man didn't reply. He simply stood there, watching as Ben and Lucky turned around. But even as they walked away, Ben could feel the man's eyes on his back long after they passed the corner. That night, Ben couldn't sleep. The soft breathing of Lucky beside his bed comforted him, but his mind was racing. He grabbed a flashlight and tiptoed to the garage, where he'd left his sketchbook. He flipped to a clean page and began to draw the compound from memory: the cameras, the SUV, the man's mirrored glasses. He labeled the map with arrows, marking where Lucky had stopped, where the gate had buzzed, where he had felt the tension twist tight in the air. Then, something strange happened. Lucky rose from the rug, walked over, and placed a paw gently on the page. Ben looked at him. "What?" Lucky sat, staring. Ben followed his gaze. His eyes drifted to a spot on the fence he had drawn what had looked like just another bush nearby. But now, through Lucky's steady gaze, Ben saw it again in memory. A small blinking red light. A sensor, maybe. Or something more. "You want to go back there, don't you?" Lucky's ears twitched once. Then silence. The next day was Saturday. Ben packed a backpack with snacks, a flashlight, and the sketchbook. He left a note on the fridge for his mom, saying he was at the library. Lucky seemed to understand everything. They walked the long way around the compound and found a break in the fence behind a collapsed section near the woods. Inside, the place was quieter than he expected. There were no birds, no breeze, just rows of dull buildings and antennas. The walls had paint peeling off and rusted metal doors, but the air felt alive, like something beneath the surface was humming. Lucky moved confidently, not sniffing randomly but following a path. Ben followed closely. At one of the storage sheds, Lucky stopped and pawed at the door. It was locked. Ben knelt and looked around. His fingers traced the bottom edge of the door. There, half buried in dirt, was a wire. He followed it to a small metal plate in the ground, stamped with the letter E. E for what? Ben scribbled in his sketchbook again. As he looked up, Lucky stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on something ahead. A figure. Another man in uniform. But this one wasn't watching them. He was talking into a device. Ben ducked behind the shed, pulling Lucky with him. Through the gap in the boards, Ben heard a whisper. "The boy has the dog. I repeat, the dog's been found. They're together. What are your orders?" Ben's heart pounded. He didn't understand everything, but he understood one thing. They were being watched. And this was no ordinary wildlife compound. It was something else. Something built to hide. Ben didn't go home that night. At least, not the way most kids do. After slipping away from the compound, heart still racing from the voice he overheard, he took Lucky and cut through the woods behind the old church. He knew of a small, long-abandoned cabin his father used to talk about before he left. It wasn't far. Just deeper into the pines, past where cell phones lost their signal and the ground felt colder, even when the air was still. They reached the cabin just as snow began to fall. The roof had holes, and the windows were clouded with frost, but it still stood. The inside smelled of dry wood and forgotten winters. Ben set down his backpack and spread out the blanket he had brought for Lucky. The dog sat silently near the fire pit, watching Ben's every move like he already knew this was more than just a place to hide. Ben knelt beside him. "We need answers, and I think you already know where to find them." Lucky's ears twitched. Then he walked across the room, nose brushing along the wall until he stopped at a dusty cabinet. He tapped it once with his paw. Ben hesitated, then opened it. Inside, behind a loose wooden panel, was a metal box, old, cold to the touch, and locked with a simple latch. Ben's fingers trembled as he undid it. The lid creaked open. Inside was a faded photograph. A woman, a young boy, and Lucky, standing between them like a protector. The woman looked familiar, though Ben couldn't place why. Beneath the photo were two items, a black voice recorder and a file folder marked E7, clearance level red. Ben turned the recorder over in his hand. The power switch was still intact. He pressed play. A crackle of static. Then a woman's voice, clear but shaken. "This is Officer Sarah Wren, codename Ember. If you're hearing this, they've erased me. They'll say I never existed. My partner, the dog, his name is Bramble. He's been programmed to remember what they want to forget. Project E7 isn't about wildlife. It's about children. About testing. Memory manipulation. They tried to wipe us both out when we walked away. If Bramble is with you, you're in danger. He carries the truth in his silence. Protect him. And find the boy." Ben looked down at Lucky. No, Bramble. The name echoed strangely inside him. Bramble sat calmly, tail curled around his paws, eyes reflecting the flicker of the dying light. The folder held pages of reports, lists of test subjects, medical terms, brainwave scans, a location with coordinates. All of it way over Ben's understanding, but the tone was unmistakable. Something terrible had happened, and someone had fought to stop it. Bramble looked at the photo, then gently pressed his nose to the boy in the picture. Ben felt a chill not from the snow, but from recognition. The boy, he looked like him. No, he looked exactly like him. He turned the photo over. A handwritten note. Miles, age 4. Re-signed memory. Clearance read. Escort Bramble. Ben stared, heart pounding louder with every second. Miles. That was his middle name. The one his mother never used. The one on his birth certificate. Was he that boy? He grabbed the voice recorder again, pressed rewind, and listened closely. The woman's voice repeated, soft but full of urgency. Protect him, and find the boy. Bramble moved to the door. He stood alert, ears up. A sound in the distance. Tires. A faint hum of an engine rolling over snow. "They've found us." Ben packed the folder, the recorder, the photo. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. He wasn't just a boy who found a lost dog. He was the reason the dog had returned. And someone didn't want him to remember why. The knock on the cabin door was gentle at first. 3 slow raps, spaced evenly apart. Ben froze. He had already doused the fire and covered the windows, but outside the snow had stopped falling and left a quiet hush that made every sound more alive. Bramble stood in front of him, shoulders squared, body rigid. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stared at the door as though he could see through it. Ben backed away, clutching the photograph and the voice recorder. The name Miles burned in his mind. The photo had aged, faded, but the boy in it, he was sure now. It wasn't just someone who looked like him. It was him. Or at least someone who had been him before something had been taken away. The knock came again. Then a voice. "Ben, my name is Ethan. I'm not here to hurt you." The boy's stomach clenched. That name. It was on one of the files in the folder. Ethan Cross. Former handler. Classified defected. I used to work with Bramble. He remembers me. Ben stayed silent. "Look, I know this is confusing." Ethan continued from the other side of the door. "But that dog, he didn't find you by accident. He was trained to find you, because they knew someday you'd start remembering." Bramble gave a single low whine. Then, unexpectedly, he walked forward and scratched once at the door. Ben reached for his bag and slowly opened the latch. The door creaked as it swung open. Outside stood a man in his 30s, snow dusting his jacket, his expression gentle but tired. He had a beard that looked like it had once been military neat, now softened by time. His hands were raised. "Hey there. You're Ben, right?" Ben didn't answer. He looked at Bramble, who stepped out and sniffed Ethan's hand, then wagged his tail once. Ethan smiled. "That's how I knew I found the right place." They sat inside, Bramble between them. Ben showed him the photo, the files. Ethan took them in with quiet recognition, nodding slowly. "You're not just some kid who found a stray," he said gently. "You're Project E7's last piece. You and Bramble. Together." Ben frowned. "Why me?" "Because years ago, when you were only 4, they tried to change your memories. Wipe them. You were part of a test group, children with trauma, grief. They thought they could overwrite your past with something more manageable. It was meant to help you. but it was never ethical. Ben's voice cracked. I don't remember any of that. Ethan nodded. That's the point. But Bramble does. He was assigned to protect you. They tried to decommission him after we left, but he escaped. And for all these years, he's been trying to come back to you. Ben whispered, I thought I just found him. Ethan looked him in the eyes. He found you. He was never lost. From his coat, Ethan pulled out a drawing. It was old, wrinkled. Crayon on construction paper. A door with the label E7. Underneath, a small boy had written one word, home. You drew this? Ethan said, before they took it away. Ben stared at the image. His throat felt tight. Why now? Because something's happening. They're reopening the project under new names. Same facility, different story. They're testing on kids again. But this time it's about erasing behavior, identity controlling memories. And they need you out of the way. You're the proof that it didn't work. Ben's hands clenched. So what do? We find the last entry point. The original room E7. It's still there, buried under the compound, and it still holds your real file, the one they never finished deleting. Bramble stood and walked to the door again, tail still. He's ready, Ethan said. And we don't have much time. As the night deepened, the three of them slipped out of the cabin. The photo was tucked in Ben's jacket, the voice recorder in his bag. The snow crunched under their boots and paws, but the world felt quieter now. Not because the danger was gone, but because the silence was finally beginning to speak. They reached the edge of the compound just before dawn. The air was colder now, but still. No guards patrolled the perimeter this early. Only the buzz of distant power lines and the sound of Bramble's slow, cautious steps accompanied them. Ethan knelt behind a cluster of storage units near the northern fence. This is where they used to bring the test subjects in, he said quietly. There's a tunnel entrance under Building C. It's sealed now, but I know how to get in. Ben crouched beside him, heart pounding. He clutched the crumpled drawing, the one he had made as a little boy, the one that showed a red door labeled E7. He still didn't remember making it, but somehow it felt like a memory he had lived 1,000 times. And Bramble hadn't left his side once. His fur brushed against Ben's leg now, warm and steady, like a tether to something real. Ethan led them around the corner to the back of Building C. A rusted panel on the ground lay hidden beneath pine needles and moss. He pried it open with a metal rod. Beneath it, concrete stairs descending into darkness. You sure about this? Ethan asked, looking at Ben. Ben nodded. I need to know who I am. The stairs creaked with age. They descended slowly, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the stale air. Bramble led, ears forward, his breathing quiet and measured. Below, a long corridor stretched into shadow. Walls lined with flickering fluorescent lights. No signage. Just numbers B1, B2, and finally E7. The door was smaller than Ben imagined. Not red, just steel, locked with a keypad. Ethan frowned. It needs a code. Ben stepped forward. He closed his eyes, then typed 0415. The door clicked. Opened. How did you? Ethan began. Ben didn't answer. He didn't know. He just knew it felt right. Inside, the room was silent. A small desk. An old monitor. Shelves of black binders, some half-burned. But what caught Ben's eye was a case on the floor. Inside, a small collar. Worn. Familiar. Bramble stepped forward, nose twitching. He pawed at a nearby drawer. Ethan opened it. Inside was a folder read, stamped, and sealed. On the cover, subject Miles. Memory override trial status failed. Beneath it, in red ink, subject reassigned to civilian life. Guardian unit, Bramble. Ben reached for the file. As he touched it, a memory, real or imagined, flooded his mind. A hand stroking his hair. A voice whispering, he'll forget, but the dog won't. A scream in the dark. He gasped and staggered back. Bramble pressed against him, grounding him. They took everything from you, Ethan said. But they didn't expect Bramble to find his way back. They didn't expect you to start remembering. Suddenly, a shout echoed from the corridor behind them. Heavy boots. Flashlights. "They're here," Ethan whispered. Ben grabbed the file. Ethan tossed the collar into his bag. "Through here." Ethan motioned to a side door. They ran. Down a narrow hall lit only by alarms now flashing red. Bramble didn't flinch. He sprinted ahead, leading them through twist after twist, clearly remembering every turn. They burst through a metal exit and into the cold dawn light. Snow had begun to fall again. Behind them, shouts. Then the sound of a gun cocking. "Freeze. Now." Ethan turned and raised his hands, but Ben kept running. Bramble didn't leave him. From the ridge above, a black SUV tore across the slope. A man stepped out. The same one from before, mirrored sunglasses. No name tag. "You were never supposed to exist," he said coldly. Ben stepped in front of Bramble. "I do exist. And now I remember." The man raised his weapon. But Bramble leapt first. The gun fired once, and everything went white. The gunshot rang across the ridge like a crack of lightning, echoing into the snow-covered silence. For a moment, everything stopped. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Bramble hit the man midair, teeth clamped around his wrist as the weapon flew from his hand and skidded across the ice. The man fell backward, slamming into the side of the SUV. Ethan moved fast, tackling him before he could recover, pinning him to the ground. Ben stood frozen in the snow, the folder clutched tightly in his arms, heart hammering in his chest. Then he saw it blood, a small line of red blooming against Bramble's shoulder. No. Ben dropped to his knees beside the dog as Bramble stumbled back toward him, panting heavily but still upright. You're okay? Ben whispered, pressing his hands against the wound. Bramble's eyes met his, steady and full of something that looked like peace. Behind them, the compound gates burst open. 2 black vehicles sped toward them, tires slicing through snow. Ethan looked up. "We don't have time. More are coming." He pulled the man's ID card and tossed it to Ben. "Get to the airstrip. One of the old transport shuttles might still work. Go. Now." Ben hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll hold them off. I've done this before." "But..." Ethan leaned down, placing a hand on Ben's shoulder. "You found your name. You found him. That was the mission. Now finish it." Bramble nudged Ben's side and turned toward the tree line. Even injured, his stride was sure. They ran. Through the forest, over frozen roots, down an old access trail that led to a forgotten hangar once used for supply runs. Ben's lungs burned. His legs ached. But he didn't stop. When they reached the clearing, the hangar door stood slightly ajar. Inside, beneath a heavy tarp, was a transport shuttle, old but intact. Ben yanked the cover off and climbed inside. Dust exploded into the air. He had never flown anything before. But as he slid into the seat, the control panel blinked to life. The IHO card fit into a slot marked Security Override. Lights turned green. Bramble stood near the ramp, blood staining his fur, but eyes calm. Ben turned to him. "We're almost there, buddy. Stay with me." The engines growled. Behind them, distant gunfire echoed through the trees. The shuttle's doors began to close. Ben glanced once more through the cracked windshield. He saw Ethan, standing at the tree line, one hand raised in a silent goodbye. Then they lifted. The shuttle broke through the trees and soared into the pale morning sky. Ben didn't cry until they were above the clouds. Safe, at least for now. Bramble lay beside him, head resting on Ben's lap. He pulled the photo from his jacket. The woman. The boy. The dog. He turned it over again. The handwriting. Miles. Age 4. Ben looked out the window, then down at Bramble. My name was never just Ben, was it? Bramble blinked once, slowly. Miles. That name didn't feel foreign anymore. It felt buried. Like a truth finally allowed to surface. He reached for the voice recorder again and pressed play. Protect him, and find the boy. They did. And now, it was time to protect others. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of remembering everything. 1 month later, the airstrip was quiet again, but this time not with fear, only with peace. Miles, he had begun using that name now, stood at the edge of a field outside the town of Havenbrook, where he and Bramble had taken shelter. The authorities, after reviewing the evidence he escaped with the folder, the files, the recordings, had launched an investigation. What remained of Project E7 was now under full federal inquiry. Several arrests had been made. The compound was sealed. But none of that had brought back the years Miles had lost. What did bring something back, something real, was the sound of Bramble's soft footsteps on the porch every morning, the way the dog leaned into him when he woke from nightmares, the way Bramble seemed to know every road, every path that once held a part of their story, even if Miles hadn't remembered yet. The vet had said Bramble was healing well. The bullet had missed any major arteries, but still Miles had stayed beside him each night, whispering stories of a life he was beginning to reclaim. Today a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape, an old military badge, and a note. He made it out. He's safe. You gave him a second chance. Now take yours. Miles held the badge to the sunlight. Ethan. Somewhere out there, the man who risked everything was still watching. He played the tape. This is Officer Sarah Wren. If this reaches you, know that memory is not a prison, it is a path. Bramble remembers because someone has to. But you are more than what they tried to erase. What you carry now is not just survival. It is truth. And truth, my boy, is what sets the next story free. Miles closed his eyes. Later that day, a crowd gathered outside an old community center. A new sign had been hung above the entrance. It read, "The Bramble Project. A place to remember." Inside, children and teenagers sat on soft mats, each with a rescue dog beside them. Volunteers served food. Teachers read books. And in the back, Miles stood at a podium holding a collar in one hand and a photograph in the other. He told them about a dog who wasn't supposed to survive. About a boy who was told to forget. About how silence can carry memory deeper than sound ever could. And then he let the photo go, clipped it to a wall filled with dozens of others. Pictures of kids and dogs and names being remembered again. That night, as golden light fell across the hillside, Miles stood outside the center. Bramble sat beside him, eyes on the sky. "You brought me back," Miles whispered. "Not just to life, but to myself." Bramble rested his head against the boy's hip, content. Somewhere beyond the trees, wind moved gently through the pines. Not as a warning, but as a promise. Because some stories don't end with memory. They begin with it. Thank you for listening to the entire story. If this journey moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss the next story of hope and discovery. Leave us a comment with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. See you in the next episode.